everybody. Welcome online to our Encounter Extra or Encounter Online Extra. We're really keen to have Tim Hein with us, the Rev Dr Tim Hein, friend and mentor of mine for a long time. And thanks for jumping on, Tim.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Mike. Hello, everybody.
How's your health? The important question right now.
Health is well. Health is keeping up nice and strong.
It's good.
With the providence of God. So, yes, thank you. How's yours?
Yeah, actually not great, but I'm isolating. I'll be fine. I don't have coronavirus.
Good. Yeah.
That's of course what somebody with coronavirus would say too. But I'm very sure I don't have coronavirus. It's good. So, well, moving across from that for a minute, we're doing in the middle of the Faith for Exiles series based on the David Kinnaman and Mark Matlock book, out of all the Barna research that came out late last year, and have just done a sermon on faith at work and vocation. And you've of course done in your time. We should have said for intro. Do you want to give us a mini bio of yourself? What you do now?
Well, I do two things. One is I'm the minister at Malvern Uniting Church, and I'm part-time. I'm also on faculty at Uniting College for Leadership and Theology, and I've been there for about 9 years. And so one of the topics that I teach there is what you're probably alluding to, which is called Beyond Sunday, which is looking at questions of faith and work and life and all those sorts of things beyond Sunday.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so I think, it's always a pertinent topic, particularly pertinent for different reasons right now, which we can get into in a second. But I guess, how would you give us an overview of how would you suggest we look at maybe a theology of work in a really simple sense?
Yeah, there's probably two things that I'd say. The first one is just to stop and reflect on funnily enough, how much of the Christian life is talked about in terms of passive reflection. That is, when we talk about having a Christian faith and living our Christian life, we immediately reach for comments like, or practices like prayer and reading the Bible,
right,
and meditating or worship, singing. Now, these are all marvelous and wonderful activities, of course, but they are all things you do in your spare time. They're all things that's not traffic, it's not nappies, it's not work, it's not study. It's the things you do early in the morning before you do that, or on the weekend on Sunday at church. So it's just interesting to think about when we think of the Christian life and discipleship, how much of it is related to those extra bits, which are about stopping and taking the time to spend time with God. And I think one way to start thinking about faith and work is to remember the fact that we don't go and meet God just in those quiet times, but God is with us and the Spirit is active in our activities as much as in our reflective times.
Yeah.
What does it look like to be the Christian life in the midst of traffic? What does it look like, the Christian life in the midst of a meeting at work, or in the midst of a really difficult conversation, or in the midst of our sport even? So trying to think that through is, I think, a really helpful part. What does it mean to be a Christian disciple in our activities as much as in our reflective moments, as important as reflective moments are?
Right, great. And to me, as I hear you say that, it makes me think of that old phrase that maybe I don't hear quite as much anymore, about the sacred secular divide. The idea that some things are sort of godly and some are not. But it sounds like what you're talking about is much more integrated than that.
Well, you make a really great point. That is that we live with something that we call dualism. Dualism being two, that is the sacred things and the secular things. That comes down from Greek philosophy, really, that things that are spiritual are elevated and holy, and things that are secular or material of this world are profane and less than. So when we start to have those two categories, we end up putting, Christian worship albums and prayer books and all that in one end of the bookshelf, and then we put everything else down the other end. And unfortunately, down the other end ends up all those tangible aspects of life. It ends up also with food, and with work and with play. And like I said, classic, the ordinary things, cleaning the house and doing the dishes, suddenly that's just something less than that we need to get done quickly so that we can go and do the spiritual things.
Yeah.
And that's totally contrary to the teaching of the New Testament. In the New Testament, Paul says it's actually about those things being offered as acts of worship to God as well. We do all things for the glory of God.
Yeah.
And so whether you're, when you're, in fact, it's really lovely. Martin Luther, the great reformer in the 16th century, actually wrote about the fact that a father can wash the nappies of a baby to the glory of God in a way that no priest or monk ever knows, how to do.
Yeah.
They're off living in the monastery, living a spiritual life, so to speak.
Yeah.
He says they don't get to glorify God in the same way that a father doing the nappies. And I love that kind of real integrated image, the ordinary stuff of life being done to the glory of God.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's fantastic and really helpful, I think. And especially helpful, I read something recently that I think challenged me, that sometimes we preach in a way as if we just want pastors to come out of the congregation, as opposed to people in a whole bunch of different vocations. I thought that was really interesting. Yeah. I mean, to sort of keep digging into that then, I think, Encounter is largely populated of young adults, although not exclusively. And one of the things I noticed about young adults is it's a stage of life where change is a constant. They're in flux all the time about, relationships, about courses and study, and about the workplace. And sort of in amongst this, they're asking the big questions of life about meaning and purpose. And amongst that, I guess, would be what we often call call. What is our call from God? What is the call from God on my life? And I've found that is, it's a very purposeful, very meaningful concept, but it can also be a bit of a weight and a bit of a burden if you don't know what that call is. I just wonder what your thoughts were around that idea of call linked with vocation.
Yeah, and this is a really rich area, but you're right. Even going back to, say, the 16th century and so forth, to have a call was to become a minister. It meant that when someone said, do you have a call? It meant that you were called to be a priest or a monk or a nun, and everyone else just had work. It's like, no, I don't have a call. I'm a blacksmith.
Right. Right.
And it was terrible. But one of the great things about that particular time in the church is the notion of call was expanded out to every person. And again, Martin Luther wrote really richly on this, the idea of a person having a vocation. It wasn't just a so-called church vocation, but was a vocation as a blacksmith or as a farmer, or as a homemaker. And that was actually part of God's ministry in the world. And he famously said, God milks cows through the milkmaid. The milkmaid has a vocation that's part of God's activity in the world. So that's beautiful and that's wonderful. But the second part of that, of course, is that you can sometimes feel the pressure of vocation. And I remember it being something almost obsessive. What is it that God is calling me to do in a very special, unique kind of way? And I think there is a truth in the midst of that. We do live at a time in history when we have the privilege of choosing a vocation, and that's not always been the case for the majority of people in the world today. It's not the case. You do what your dad trains you to do, or your mum trains you to do, or you take the job you can get just to survive. That's your vocation. And that can actually be helpful as a reminder, because I've sat with a lot of young adults, and I remember this as well, that feeling of, what is my unique, one special path that will lead to all meaning and purpose in my work every day.
Right.
And I tell you, you're not going to get the meaning of life out of your work. It just puts far too much pressure on a vocation to be the answer to all your dreams. So there is a wonderful sense that I think the Apostle Paul in Corinthians talks about people who become Christians, and he says, remain in the station that you are in. And what he means by that, he's talking about marriage, That is that if you become a Christian and you are married, don't go leaving your marriage. But the word, the station and how it's talked about is really around that word vocation as well. Remain what you're doing. In other words, if you're a carpenter, keep carpenting. Don't stop and think that the end of the world is nigh and now we're just going to go and huddle in the desert and worship God forever. It's much more a case of keep turning up to work, do it. Now, whatever you've got in front of you to do it, and do it to the glory of God. And it doesn't have to be so super special. It can have meaning because you are now doing it to the glory of God. It actually means that you can take a vocation that the world might consider as being lower in status, but you're actually liberated from thinking about vocation in terms of status. You can do something that you want to do, that you can do, that you enjoy doing, and you can do it to the glory of God. And that gives it meaning and status, even if it's very repetitive work or something the world considers to be of less status. You don't have to actually try and find your life's meaning in your work, because your life can be, and meaning can be found in the fact that God loves you and died for you in Jesus Christ.
Right. And that's great. I think of the maybe the classic go-to here is like the garbage collector, okay, it might not be the job you aspired to as a child, but there's tremendous meaning in the work in terms of, you think about the value it holds in what would happen if we didn't have garbage collectors, what our society would look like, what our notion of beauty would look like around us. Of course, disease, a pertinent question right now, and how that would be affected by rotting garbage, et cetera, et cetera. I just wonder if you could dig in a little bit again there into this idea of, because again, many young adults most of them are in jobs they don't really want to be in, or they're in jobs that are transition jobs as maybe they're studying and looking ahead. And that keeps us in that same place, which is a very Christian place. I think it's stuck in the now and the not yet. The now being, I work at, I don't know, Macca's or something. And the not yet being, I'm going to get a degree and be a doctor. And the idea, that you've just touched on, that one of those is not going to fulfill you and the other one isn't. How can we find more fulfillment in that Macca's job, or in that working in a clothing store?
Yeah, Christianity has some fantastic resources in this. The first thing is I often remember work as remembering that work is fundamentally about people,
right?
And that is it's an act of service. I get to serve not just God, but I get to serve other people through my work, no matter what that work is. For years and years, I used to stock shelves in Foodland when I was studying. And I always thought it as an act of service, but to the people who would come along, and how can they find things easily, and how do we know it's clean, and all the rest of it. We know now, just today in the midst of this crisis, how vital supermarkets and them being stocked well is. And you suddenly realise, wow, I'm just a small part of a very important service that's happening, because we're all in this together. And whether you're serving at Macca's, or where you're collecting the garbage, or stocking shelves at Foodland, if you look at it in individualistic terms, me and what I want to do and how I'm special, it can feel repetitive and it can lose meaning. But then you remember that we're actually all in this together, in the way society works. We're actually, Paul uses the image of the body to talk about the church, the arms and the legs, and Christ is the head. But actually all of society is a body. None of us can survive without anyone else. And so it's actually helpful. You feel a deep sense of participation in being part of something bigger than yourself. You're just one step, or one place, one limb in the midst of the big body. But the other thing I'd say about that as well is it's often the people you're with. Work is about people. And it's incredible how so much of our meaning and love for work can come from the relationships with people at work. And I think this is where we might think about it being a Christian vocation, because when let's say even to use the example of moving into some other job 20 years from now, let's say you're in some high-flying career, or you're in some important job, or you're doing exactly what you'd love to be doing, and then you have the opportunity for a promotion but that promotion will take you outside of the team you've been working with for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And for 5 years, you've been building relationships, you've been having successes together and failures together, working hard together and building things together. And you're hopefully demonstrating your Christian faith to these people as well, maybe even sharing your Christian faith to them. And then suddenly you've got this hotshot promotion to move and you're leaving that team. And so you want to stop and ask, at the end of the day, is this about me and my career, or is this about something bigger? What if you had the ability to actually turn down a hotshot promotion because you wanted to stay with that team, to love those people and to be with them and to be connected with them?
Yeah.
And I know from secular ears, that'll sound crazy. Why would you turn down personal promotion? But of course, this is the Christian faith. This is not about my work. This is something eternal. I'm here serving God. I'm serving these people. What if I want to stay with these people and I might love them and go beyond, and I'll be the first one to work and the one who helps and makes it easier for the other people around me. There's a whole wonderful Christian ethic when you think about how would Jesus do this job if he was here? Right. Well, he'd be thinking of it in terms of the people and being a good craftsman in the job and what he does. So it does change your perspective when you start realizing that every job, no matter what it is kind of about ultimately people and serving and loving people.
Yeah. That's what I love about that, is that really hits on some of the stuff that Kinnaman and Matlock were talking about in the book. They use the phrase the right sizing of ambition to talk about how basically the narratives amongst, let's say, millennial and Gen Z Christians and millennial and Gen Z secular workforce are actually pretty much the same in terms of seeking promotion and seeking pay. The narratives we've told ourselves are, no, I want a job that fills me with meaning and has purpose. But when we have to make decisions about it, it seems like we're actually choosing pay and we're actually choosing promotion, or more positional power in that way rather than that meaning. So I think that's really interesting and deeply helpful. What would you say, though, in terms... Oh, go on. Did you have something else?
Oh, the thought just came to me as you were saying that about the way a theologian, Miroslav Volf, he offers a paradigm for thinking about how your work can be Christian. And he says you can approach it as a Christian work with a paradigm of justice and love. And what he means is, he says, when we look at God's character, when we look at God defines himself as being just and love. He's just because he's the ultimate judge, and justice in the Bible is the same word as righteousness. He is ultimately righteous and good, and he's just, but he is also love, and God is love. And so he says, what if we use those two as a paradigm for work? He says, think about your job and make sure that at the bare minimum, it's just. In other words, don't do a job that rips people off, and don't go about your job in a way that rips off your co-workers. Go in, at the very least, do a just job. Do the job and have what Lady Dorothy Sayers calls a ministry of competence. That is, be good at it, actually be competent at the job.
Right.
And do it in a just way, and do it in a just place as well, that this is not a workplace which is ripping off the third world or whatever. Do a just job. But that's not just doing a just job, isn't like the possibility. That's just the bare minimum.
Yeah.
He says, then we think about the maximum, which is actually this job could be an act of love. So I can go to work and I'm not going to rip anyone off. I'm not going to turn up late. I'm not going to scam anyone. I'm not going to just be lazy. I'm going to be just. I'm going to use that God's characteristic of justice in the way I go about it. But actually, I'm going to go more than that. It's going to be an act of love. And when it comes to, let's say, sweeping the floor in a storeroom, which I did in a storeroom at Foodland many, many times. I can do a lazy job, a bad job, a quick job, or I can do a just job. I swept the floor and the manager go, yeah, okay, that's adequate. Or I can do it as an act of love. What if I swept that floor as an act of love? A love for cleanliness, a love for the manager, a love for my fellow co-workers, a love of hygiene, a love for the customers. And I swept that floor as an act of love.
Yeah,
and you just know, You know what I mean? I'm going to do it differently. And if you're a school teacher, whoops, I'm just clicking on my battery thing there. If you're a school teacher, you can do a just job. The kids learnt maths and then they went home, or it can be an act of love. I stayed back. I spent extra time with that kid. And the same with your study. I got that essay in, or I did that particular quiz, that exam. I did it. I did just enough. I didn't cheat. Well, congratulations. You did it just, or it can be an act of love. I went over and above. I did the readings, and then I did more readings. And then I just thought, I want to suck the marrow out of this bit of information. I want to know it as an act of love. And when it comes to study, you're loving really yourself in that sense, honoring God by showing love. So that justice love paradigm can be really helpful. And I know around the house it's the same. I can just clean up the house, or I can clean up the house as an act of love. Love for my wife, love for my kids, love for a clean home, and all the rest of it. So
no, that's awesome. And I think that feeds really nicely into this idea of being an exile in they call it digital Babylon in where we live now, and the idea that in Babylon, Jeremiah encourages the people to work for the good of the city they live in, and in an act of love to settle down and really to build, to create, to do something that represents the kingdom of God in and amongst this foreign land in exile. Okay.
No, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say one last sort of question. We've really quickly moved into a place where jobs and vocation look really different and really unsettled and transient and scary for a lot of people. I know a lot of our casual workforce that Encounter have been cut off or retrenched, basically. A lot of our full-time employees have been cut down in their hours, and so I think it forces us to rethink through our understanding of work, and perhaps how we go about it. I was wondering if you had any words of encouragement or wisdom to how people pursue work and vocation in a time like this.
Yeah, it can be really frustrating and really difficult. And I would encourage something practical and something biblical. The practical one would be, you can go into business for yourself. And what I mean by that is it just takes a bucket and some water and some soap to go into the window washing business for the homes in your area.
Yeah.
And you can do this. You just think of ideas of work you can do. If you really want to work, you can create work around about you. You can cultivate it. You can go to neighbours' homes and you can find innovative ideas. My friend and I were looking for work one time, and we came up with this idea. We go, hang on a sec, there are mechanic workshops all the way down the road over here, Brighton Road. Why don't we go from mechanic to mechanic to mechanic? And it was like, I can't remember what we charged, like $5 or $20 or just a quick amount of cash to clean their toilet, because all workshops have disgusting, dirty toilets. No one ever cleans them. Yeah. And so we're like, what if we go in and we do a 15-minute clean for $5? We come out, we move to the next one, cash in hand. And we did that for several days and made money. And it's just like, you just invent a job out of midair. If you want to serve and you're willing to work and work hard and get your hands dirty, you can find a job. So that's a really practical kind of one. The second one is to enforce that is to think about the book of Genesis. In the book of Genesis, we find that God works. God creates the world. And he builds it. God's a builder and an architect and a gardener. God creates the world. And if you can just sit with that and start and read through the creation of the world, you start to see this wonderful activity of a God who makes things, makes them out of nothing. And then he makes humans, and then he gives them a particular commission to go forth, and he talks about to have dominion and subdue the earth. And those words are translated a bit more unhelpfully. They're really about cultivation. That is, go forth and cultivate the earth. In other words, help it to find its full potential. That's what he's saying. Go out into these fields and help. Basically, he's saying to them, continue the creative task. It's your job now to take over from me. So God delegates the creation to us. Go out, create, and steward the earth by going forth and planting and cultivating and building and designing. And just think of how that's been done on occasion in an unstewarding, unhelpful way to the detriment of the environment. But it's marvelous where innovative, creative, cultivating thinking then helps to rectify that as well, to become more environmentally responsible. We have gone forward, and Christians have been at the forefront of this, of what does it mean for us to continue God's creative act in the world. God works. He's a gardener. And every time you go out in the garden or go mow the lawns, you're continuing the creative work of God in the world. You're helping to cultivate and steward the creation. And it's the same with food, and it's the same with laboring and with building, and it's the same all over. No matter what you're doing, think of it in this way: I'm continuing on God's creative act in the world. I'm cultivating and stewarding creation, and that might be creating information technology, or it might be creating, plants in pots. But I think that's really helpful to know, no matter what the task is, no matter how practical or small or menial or whatever it is, you can do it knowing that that God is a God who got his hands dirty by creating the world. And even Jesus comes, he doesn't come as this soldier, he doesn't come as this high priest in that sense. He comes as a carpenter. And I love that. Someone with sawdust on his hands, and he goes out to minister. And so there's that wonderful trajectory of the dignity of practical, meaningful work, and just remembering that, I think, can bring a lot of theological energy and excitement to whatever job we can find to do.
Yeah, that's so good. And I love literally the place that we're given this capacity to cultivate and to steward and to work is in creation. In the act of creation, in the space of creation, it's right in there in paradise itself that we're given this mandate to labor and to work and to create and to cultivate, and that's fantastic. Thanks so much for your time, mate. Really appreciate you taking the time out of a very busy schedule in this moment to share with us, and no doubt we can keep track of what you're doing at Uniting College, following Malvern Uniting and the works happening there via all the social channels and the website. I know you guys have been busy jumping on Church Online and sorting that out like the rest of us, upskilling in a hurry. And so just bless you, mate, in all your works as you continue on. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Mike, and bless you as well as you do ministry in this unusual time, and to everyone at Encounter. May God help you to make something significant of this time even as well as a community in a new and rich way. It's a great pleasure to talk with you, and I look forward to being with you sometime to preach again sometime.
That'd be great. All right. Thanks so much, Tim.